Have you heard of that augmented reality ghost app? The one you can't download anymore? It was up on the App Store for a few days, then it vanished like it never existed. Apple took it down after the accident. Maybe you saw it on the news? A man, my brother, took his own life because of what the app showed him. I need to tell you his story. The app was called Spirit Caller. The description said it could call back spirits to places where they had died, letting you see them, talk to them through your phone's camera. Sounds like some stupid hoax, right? That's what my brother thought too, until he used it. He wasn't even looking for it. He was trying to book a flight on Spirit Airlines for an interview at med school, but he clicked on Spirit Caller by mistake. He laughed about it. He thought it was some gimmick, like another Pokémon Go ripoff. He loved them games as though he downloaded it on a whim, just to check it out. I was with him that day. We were driving to the mall, catching up. I remember watching him open the app. It was simple, like the camera on his iPhone, but it had this unsettling vibe. The logo was plain, beige, with the word Spirit Caller in eerie, boxy letters that didn't fit. "Okay, this could be cool," he said, his voice light, like it was just another tech demo. "Why would you even bother with that?" I asked, half laughing. I wasn't into that paranormal stuff, and neither was he. But curiosity got the better of us. We started talking about what the app might do. "You have to be where someone died to see anything," he said, reading from the screen. "Maybe we should go to a graveyard." I laughed it off, but he was serious. On the way home, we took a detour. There was this old cemetery on the edge of town, a place I hadn't been since our father's funeral. It was quiet, the trees casting long shadows over the cracked gravestones. My brother, always up for a thrill, pulled out his phone and opened the app again. I watched as he slowly panned the camera around the graveyard. At first, nothing. Then, something changed. The air felt heavier, colder. "No way," he whispered, his voice shaky. "What?" I asked, turning to him. He was staring at his phone, pale as a ghost. I saw someone," he stammered. His hand trembled as he pointed to a spot near an old grave. "Right there, a woman, dressed in black." I laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You're messing with me, right?" He wasn't. His face, God, I'll never forget that look. It was terror, pure and raw. He dropped his phone, stumbling back like he'd seen a nightmare come to life. "I'm telling you, she was right there," he insisted, eyes wide. She looked at me, like she knew me. I picked up his phone, but when I glanced through the screen, there was nothing. Just the gravestones, the same peaceful, solemn place it had always been. But something had changed. From that moment on, my brother wasn't the same. He became obsessed with the app. He kept using it, visiting places where people had died. Every time he swore, he saw someone waiting for him, calling to him. And then one night, he just disappeared. I found his phone by his bedside, opened to Spirit Caller. The last place it had taken him was our childhood home, the spot where our father had died. That's when I knew the app was no hoax. It was something far worse, something evil, and now it's gone. Taken down before anyone else could suffer the same fate. But I know, it's still out there, somewhere, waiting. My brother slowly panned the phone around, his hands trembling. "Dude, I swear, I saw her," he whispered, pointing to a small plot in the ground. There was no tombstone, just a weathered plaque embedded in the earth. It read, "Joseph Adental, 1812 to 1897. God took him, and he died in prayer." "You saw a woman?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Pretty sure Joseph is a man's name." He shook his head, his voice shaky. No. She was standing right there. Next to Joseph's plaque was another, barely visible in the overgrown grass. This one read, "Bertha Adental, 1809 to 1897. Grief took her. She died on the spot." I glanced at the plaque, deciding not to mention it to him. Her mouth. "It was full of maggots," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Her skin, rotting. She looked right at me smiling, but it was wrong, like her face wasn't meant to move that way. And then, she ran at me. I snatched his phone from his hand, pressing the sleep button. "It's probably some viral campaign for a horror movie," I said, trying to sound calm. "Maybe the ghost only shows up sometimes, or in certain spots." But my brother didn't look convinced. Sweat glistened on his forehead and his eyes darted around, like he expected something to leap out of the shadows. Yeah, maybe," he muttered. "Let's just go home." That night he didn't sleep. I could hear him pacing back and forth in his room. It was well past 4 a.m. and I was still awake, playing games like I always did during summer break. But something about his constant pacing unsettled me. I knocked on his door. "Dude, what are you doing?" I asked. He looked exhausted, clutching the cup of coffee, his eyes bloodshot. "A man who downloaded the app is dead," he blurted out, his voice shaky. "I've been up all night reading about it. People who download Spirit Collar, they start acting strange." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean strange?" "One guy, he stabbed himself in the eye," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Another left a suicide note, rambling about how he gave his soul to it." He pulled up a picture of the note on his laptop. It read, "I gave my soul to it. Now Lizzie won't cry forever," repeated over and over. "Lizzie?" I asked, confused. "His daughter, she died years before he killed himself," my brother explained. I shook my head, feeling a growing pit of dread in my stomach. "Come on, this has to be part of the viral campaign, right? It's just a stupid app. Go to sleep, man. We'll talk about it in the morning." But he just stared at the screen, eyes wide. "There's no way this is a viral campaign," he muttered. "Something is wrong. If it's freaking you out that much, just delete the app," I suggested, trying to sound rational. "I tried," he said, his voice cracking. "It won't let me." I scoffed. "That's ridiculous." Grabbing his phone, I tried to delete it. "How do you delete apps on this thing?" "Just hold it down," he said, watching me with a mixture of hope and fear. I held down the app icon, waiting for it to start shaking so I could delete it. But something was off. The icon quivered, but there was no X. No option to remove it. "What the hell?" I muttered, my pulse quickening. "You're the tech guy," he said, his voice cracking. "There has to be a way to delete it, right?" "Of course," I lied. "We'll figure it out in the morning." He grabbed his phone and held the power button, forcing it to shut off. "Yeah, for sure. Good night." I went back to my room, heart racing. Something about that app felt wrong. But I pushed it aside, telling myself it was all just a trick. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't peaceful. The smell of pancakes woke me. I glanced at the clock. It was almost noon. Gradually, I stumbled downstairs to find Mom at the stove, flipping pancakes. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she teased. "I was about to come shake you awake." "The pancakes did that for you," I grinned, grabbing a stack and drowning them in syrup. As I sat down, Mom's voice turned concerned. "Before you dig in, could you go wake your brother? He's usually up before now." A knot formed in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I knocked on his door, but there was no response. My pulse quickened. Slowly, I creaked the door open and peeked inside. The room was empty. "He's not here," I called out, a strange unease settling over me. "Really?" Mom replied from the kitchen, her voice sounding far away. "I didn't see him leave. Can you give him a call after you finish eating?" I nodded, sitting back down to my pancakes, but the sweet taste seemed off now, like something was wrong with the world. After forcing down a few bites, I slumped onto the couch, bleary-eyed, my stomach heavy. I dialed his number. "Hello?" His voice was strained, distant. "Dude, where are you?" "Mom made pancakes. You're not still using that app, are you?" There was a long pause. Then he said something that chilled me to my core. Do you remember where they found Dad? My heart skipped a beat. What? What are you talking about? I've always wanted to know. Did he really kill himself? I bolted upright, panic setting in. Are you serious right now? What's going on? I'm going to ask him, he said, his voice flat, before the line went dead. My throat tightened as memories flooded back. My father had died when I was 9. They found his body on a hiking trail a few miles from home. He'd fallen off a cliff, supposedly by accident. But the week before, he'd lost his high-paying job and was under investigation for financial crimes. There were whispers about suicide, but they'd ruled it an accident. His body had landed on its back. We'd survived off his life insurance payout ever since. I called my brother again. No answer. 5 more times and still nothing. Panic gnawed at me as I grabbed my keys. I'm heading out for a bit, I mumbled to Mom. She didn't question it. I was already out the door. I climbed into my beat-up Mazda and punched in the location. Wadsworth Falls, Connecticut. The trail, the place where Dad died. As I drove, I tried calling him again. Silence. The world felt colder, darker, like something was closing in. Hours passed and finally, I arrived at the trailhead, the same one we used to hike as a family. It felt familiar in the worst way possible. The scent of pine, the distant rush of water. This was where we used to picnic back when Dad was alive. I trudged down the path, sweat beading on my forehead. The sun was brutal, and I cursed myself for not bringing water. After what felt like an eternity, I slumped down under a tree for shade. I pulled out my phone, checking the App Store for Spirit Caller. It wasn't there, not on Google Play either. My mind swirled as my eyelids grew heavy. Sleep overtook me. I woke to a scream shrill, piercing through the night air. My heart hammered as I realized it was pitch black. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving the trail in utter darkness. I fumbled with my phone, turning on the flashlight. My hands shook as I stumbled forward, deeper into the wilderness. Then my phone rang. "Where are you?" I asked breathlessly. "I saw Dad," my brother's voice crackled through the line. "What? Are you still on the trail? Tell me where you are." I hurried up the path, the trees looming like shadowy figures. "I talked to him," my brother whispered. "He looks the same as the day he died." Panic clawed at my throat. "I'm coming. Just wait for me, okay?" He said something's punishing him for what he did. His voice was eerily calm now, like he wasn't even scared anymore. I ran faster, the trail getting steeper, the trees closing in. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I could barely see what was ahead of me. "None of it's real, you know that, right?" I shouted, trying to reason with him, even though I was starting to question my own sanity. "He won't let his soul go, unless I give him mine." My blood turned to ice. "No, Dad would never ask you to do that." There was a laugh on the other end of the line, twisted and wrong, like something inhuman. "I sent you a screenshot," my brother said. "I emailed it to you so you'd believe me." The top of the trail wasn't far now, where we used to picnic, where we used to laugh and eat those damn tuna sandwiches Mom never made anymore. Where Dad had fallen. "I'm almost there," I panted. "Just wait for me." Silence on the line. Then, my brother's voice, cold and distant. "Goodbye, Sam. Tell Mom I'm sorry." "No," I screamed, dropping the phone and sprinting up the last stretch. I saw him standing at the cliff's edge, looking out into the void. I lunged, trying to grab him, but he stepped forward, as if in slow motion, and disappeared over the edge. Time slowed. I watched, helpless, as his body floated downward until it struck the rocks below with a sickening crunch. I collapsed at the cliff's edge, my body shaking uncontrollably. Half an hour later, a park ranger found me, curled up, trembling, at our old picnic spot. They found my brother's body too lying on the rocks, just like Dad had. When the police arrived, I tried to explain what had happened, but my words seemed to dissolve into the air, lost amid their probing questions. The media twisted the narrative into something grotesque, depicting my brother as a mentally ill man who believed that an app allowed him to converse with the dead, a man driven to suicide by an unprocessed grief for our father. Hours after the story broke, Apple yanked the app from their store, but whispers persisted that it could still be installed on a jailbroken iPhone. I asked the police if they had recovered my brother's phone, but they hadn't. Mine was tossed on the trail, swallowed by the woods, never to be found. When I finally returned home, I dreaded facing my mother. I could only imagine the depth of her grief, an ocean of despair I didn't know how to navigate. I lay on my bed, feeling utterly hollow. The tears lodged deep inside me like stones. I was paralyzed by a mix of disbelief and dread. With a heavy heart, I dragged myself to my computer and opened Gmail. There it was, a message from my brother. No subject line, nothing in the body, just an attachment. My heart raced as I clicked on it. The image opened, revealing a dark and hazy scene at the cliff's edge. A man stood there, his face shadowed and indistinct. Was that Dad? But something lingered behind him, lurking in the gloom. I opened the picture in Photoshop, zooming in, desperate to decipher what was hidden. My stomach churned as I made out a face pale, with empty eye sockets. I increased the contrast and sharpness, revealing the horror. A face with no nose, no ears, only gaping holes where they should have been. Yet those hollow spaces had something inside, something sharp and jagged. I could see my father's terrified, wide eyes peering through the darkness. Yes, it was him for sure. I closed the picture, feeling sick. A week had passed since my brother's funeral, a surreal blur of sorrow and disbelief. Now I was left with an old flip phone to get by, its simplicity a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my mind. But today, after submitting this post, I was determined to drive to a store I'd never been to before. Apple stores are beautiful, I thought, almost ironically. It was time to buy a new phone. It was time to uncover the truth about what really happened.